And the season of love is upon us. But guess who you need to be showing the most love to? If you said yourself, you, my friend, guessed correctly. But what does the journey to self-love, self-compassion, and self-worth even look like? How can you begin to build confidence in moments when you have little to none? And if you are in a season where you are in need of a self-pep talk to assure you that you are worthy and deserving of love, even in the moments where you don't feel it, then you, my friend, have come to the right place. In today's JOYrney chat, I'll be outlining a 5-step process that you can use to speak life, self-compassion, and joy-inspired truth to turn even your darkest days to a faith-fueled masterpiece with a sprinkle of adventure. So if you're ready to get into the conversation, so am I. Stay tuned.
You're listening to the Journey to Purpose podcast with Erica Lasan. The road to joy and purpose can feel unfamiliar, uncomfortable, and sometimes, because others don't always understand it, it can be isolating and lonely. For almost 30 years of my life, I identified myself through roles and titles that put pressure on me to perform, but often left me feeling empty and void of purpose. But things got real when I discovered I'd be gaining yet another new title, that of mommy. It was at that point of surrender that I chose joy. Now, as a joy strategist and creative consultant, I help women and entrepreneurs in transitional phases of life find joy, purpose, and healing in what's next. In this podcast, we dive deep into stories, lessons, and transparent conversations to uncover vision manifesting joy gems that are sure to help you rediscover, reconnect, and recommit to your purpose and identity and joy, one feel-good thing at a time.
Hey, guys. Thanks for tuning into another episode of the Journey to Purpose podcast with me, Erica Lasan. How have you been since our last chat? Oh my goodness, so much has happened since the last time we've spoken. First things first, my little brother got married. Yay! Honestly, his wedding is hands down one of the best weddings I have ever been to. There was so much love, so much intention, so much joy and faith that were included in that day. If there's one thing I have to say I really loved and appreciated about his ceremony, it was the element of community. My brother and his wife were so present and in the moment. They didn't have to worry about anything. And it was very evident in the way that their community showed up for them. And God's presence and the Holy Spirit was just all up in the mix of their big day. If you're watching on YouTube, you're probably looking at some of the activities from the day. If you guys don't know, my husband has a photo booth company, and I am so glad that we brought the photo booth down for the day because I was so entrenched in the joy of the day that I barely captured any pictures or videos. And thankfully, we have the photo booth, so I was able to look back on some of the activities that had transpired. And it was just a really, really good time. So once again, congratulations to the new Mr. and Mrs. Lasan. But I want to hear about you guys. How's your February going? What are your plans for the big day? And by the big day, I mean Valentine's Day, which actually brings me to the topic of today's conversation, love. We're not talking about love and marriage, though. We're talking about self-love, building self-love, self-confidence, self-compassion, and all the other things. But before we get into that conversation, I do think that there's a need to discuss what love even means for you as an individual. How do you define love? How do you express love? How do you feel love? And when it comes to the month of February, do you celebrate love? Like, are you one of those people that celebrates Valentine's Day? For someone who loves love, you would think that I would celebrate the holiday that is dedicated to celebrating love, but I don't. I actually kind of detest the idea of Valentine's Day. The reason why is because a lot of emphasis is placed on showing love and expressing love on February 14th. When the truth of the matter is, if you love somebody, you should show them that you love them every single day of the year. It shouldn't be limited to one day that is centered around giving gifts, giving candy, and gifting cards. You feel me? Something else that's always bothered me about Valentine's Day as a holiday is the idea that you need to be validated in in your ability to be loved by someone else. And I say that because I remember what it was like to be a young girl, a little chocolate girl in Baltimore. And whenever February 14th came around, I just felt like I was never wanted when it came to giving out Valentines or people declaring their love for others in our classes, which is also pretty weird when you think about kids, like handing out Valentines and the sweets and candies, like, I heart you, all that. It's a little weird, right? Or is that just me? I don't know. Maybe I'm projecting a little bit, but I didn't receive that type of attention growing up. This feeling only grew as I matured in age, because when I went to middle and high school, I went to a private school where I was a minority of minorities. It was predominantly white, and I could probably count on my hands and toes the number of students of color that existed in the entire middle school and maybe even high school. And so when Valentine's Day came around, again, it wasn't something where I felt I was anyone's pick. So the idea of Valentine's Day has always kind of rubbed me the wrong way, in that you have to wait for someone to express love towards you in order to feel validated, in order to feel loved, wanted, and accepted. Because as someone who is now married and has a family of my own, these are things that I had to learn over time, and conversations that I now have with my own children. Even though my daughter is only 7 and my son is 5, we talk a lot about self-love. I want to share a joy gem from scripture that I think really kind of lays the foundation for the conversation that we're going to be having today. It comes from Matthew chapter 22, verses 36 to 40. And it says, "Teacher, what is the greatest commandment of the law?" Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments." Now, there's a whole lot to dive into right there. But I think what's most important to note is that we are told to first love God, right? But then we're also called to love others as we love ourselves. But what happens when you're not even sure how to love yourself? That's a whole conversation, right? I know. It's deep. It's deep. It gets even deeper. So today we're going to talk about how you can begin to start that process of loving yourself wholly, fully, with consistency, and with intention. But I don't want to get too far into it just yet. We're going to talk a little bit about what inspired this conversation. And it starts with story time around the 5 love languages. I came to learn about this book after Nick and I had gotten married. And at this point, we'd been married for less than a year. And we also had Aria. She was a couple of months at that point. But at that point, I had started to notice a little bit of a shift in our relationship, but I couldn't quite grasp what was happening and why I was so bothered by it. And so in a conversation that I think I was having at that time with my boss, and it wasn't even about me, he had been married previously, and he had spoken about how that book was a tool that was brought up in their relationship. So after he had mentioned it to me, I took my merry self to Amazon and I hit the buy now button, and I got a copy of the book for myself. And when I tell you I devoured that book, I read it in a matter of days. And I found the conversation to be so insightful into not only how I receive love, but how I also give love. It was through reading that book that I also began to understand what was starting to shift as I was transitioning from being a fiance to a wife, and at the same time being a wife and a mother, because all of those changes kind of happened around the same time. So as I began to read the 5 love languages, one of the clearest things that I became aware of was the fact that I didn't know how I myself defined love. As much as I was obsessed with the idea of love and the concept of love, it was starting to show up in my relationships. There's a scripture from Matthew chapter 12, verses 35 through 37. And it says, "A tree is identified by its fruit. If a tree is good, its fruit will be good. If a tree is bad, its fruit will be bad. Then it skips to verse 34. For whatever is in your heart determines what you say. A good person produces good things from a treasury of a good heart, and an evil person produces evil things from the treasury of an evil heart. The words you say will either acquit you or condemn you. I'm going to say that last part again. The words you say will either acquit you or condemn you. And the reason why I share this verse is because at that period of my journey where I was transitioning in my roles and responsibilities as a woman, as a wife, as a mom, I don't think the fruit that was coming from my tree was very sweet. I'm gonna just say it outright. I do not think that my life outwardly probably seemed very happy and very go-lucky. People probably wouldn't have recognized how I was feeling internally, but I just felt that my life wasn't producing good fruit. At that point, there was a period where I think I had experienced postpartum depression or just depression in general. I'm not sure, but I was crying a lot by myself. I was silent by myself a lot. I didn't feel very worthy of love. I felt like a bum. I did not feel very good in that period of time. And what was worse was that I kept those feelings to myself. The company that I was working with was going through a transition. And so I got let go. And at that moment, I thought it was a good thing because I figured, hey, I can stay at home. I can hang out with my daughter and be a full-time stay-at-home mom, and I can work on a couple of my passion projects. But what I didn't expect to experience was the isolation that caused me to almost resent the new role and responsibilities that I had as a wife and mother. We'll talk more about that in a future conversation. But I will say that based on that transition and the isolation that I felt and the desire that I felt to do motherhood right and do marriage right and serve others well as I thought I was supposed to, I didn't realize it, but I started to neglect myself. I started to neglect myself in taking time to do things that I loved outside of work or looking for work, because at that point, I was a freelancer, but I felt like I needed to make more consistent income. So after 4 to 6 months of being a full-time stay-at-home mom, I started looking for work again. I stopped doing passion projects, which was part of the goal. I started to focus all of my attention on being a good mom and staying home with my daughter. So a lot of my day's activities revolved around her, cleaning up the house at that point, trying to cook meals and make sure that everything was all pretty and perfect by the time Nick came home from work. I wasn't really exercising. I mentioned the piece about a tree being identified by its fruit because at one point I noticed the language that I would use towards myself was not very good. Like, I would say that I felt like a waste of space. Like, I would say I felt like a bum. When people would ask how I was doing, I wouldn't be open with sharing exactly what it is that I was going through. And over the course of time and the years that came after that, especially once I became a mom of two, I started to notice that I would say other things that weren't necessarily serving my vision of joy or my mission of living a creative and purposeful life. I would say things like, I need time alone really often. I don't know how, do you say that to yourself? Like, I need time alone. I need some alone time. I started to feel like in my marriage, I was lacking intimacy, and I started complaining about a lot of things that typically wouldn't bother me and things that weren't necessarily a big deal. But I started to feel like I was becoming naggy in my relationship. And I'm not one to nag. Honestly, at the end of the day, my husband's amazing. Nick is awesome. He always has been awesome. He's a great partner, great father. To put it bluntly, I felt like I was starting to get on his nerves. Because if I was hearing myself speak and if someone were speaking to me the way that I was speaking, I would feel like they were getting on my nerves too. Though he never expressed this to me once. That's how you know you have a good one. But me hearing my own voice, I felt like I was becoming naggy. I also heard myself mentioning to Nick, like, you don't tell me you love me. Like, I don't hear it enough. But more importantly, he shows me that he loves me in a number of ways. We're going to talk about that in a bit too. But I heard myself saying it over and over again, like, you don't ever tell me you love me. And when it came to the physical, I learned through the book, The 5 Love Languages, that physical touch is my primary love language and words of affirmation are my secondary love language, which makes sense, right? Me wanting to hear the words, I love you, or words of affirmation around what I was doing and the value that I bring to the home. But I'm also someone who has always just enjoyed physical connection. I'm a huge hugger. When I meet somebody, the first thing I'm going to do is give you a hug if you're open to it. At one point, I started to recognize that in my relationship, my marital relationship, I wanted to experience more physical intimacy. And lastly, through reading the book, what I came to realize was that I didn't show myself love as much as I wanted to receive it. Like all of the love that I was expecting others to give me, show me, express towards me, I very rarely took time to express and show to myself. So through that whole process, I began to recognize that I needed to make time for myself. I needed to figure out what love actually meant for me. And I also needed to begin to communicate how I wanted to be loved, why I wanted to be loved in the certain ways that I needed to be loved. And more importantly, I needed to express love to others, not necessarily expressing it the way that I wanted it, but I needed to express love to them in the ways that they needed to receive it. And the only way I would begin to know that was to have really intimate and sometimes uncomfortable conversations, if I'm being real. So reading this book, The 5 Love Languages, really took me on a ride of understanding love in a whole new way. That was just the foundational understanding of what love could be. 2018 was also the first year that I read the Bible straight through. As I gained biblical understanding by studying the Word of God and this new information that I had around the 5 love languages, it has really helped shape and transform the way I engage in my personal life and the way I love myself, in my career and my goals and my aspirations and my vision, and how I include other people in that vision, but more importantly, how I engage in my relationships overall. I feel like that's a very long-winded explanation as to what inspired this conversation today. So let's hop into these 5 points, shall we? Around how you can begin to build self-love and confidence one feel-good thing at a time. As always, I will be illustrating some of these points through personal journey stories of my own, but because you know how we do here on the Journey to Purpose, there are going to be some joy gems sprinkled in the mix. So I'll be sharing a couple of scriptures to support each point, along with my personal journey stories. You ready? I know y'all ready. Let's dive in. Step 1. The first thing you can do to start building self-love and confidence is to give yourself the gift of time. Okay? Give yourself the gift of time. Because the truth of the matter is we all need time for ourselves. In the last episode of the podcast, I shared how you can begin to manage your time, task, and to-dos with joy. If you have yet to check out that episode, please do. It's super insightful, really fun. We had a guest on the show. And if you're in a season of trying to figure out how you can prioritize self-care and carve out moments to be alone with yourself and your thoughts, then that episode will give you some tangible tips and tricks that you can begin to do in order to start that process. But the reason why this step in particular is included in this conversation around building self-love and confidence is because if you don't take time for yourself, it is very hard to learn and understand what you may need in order to feel loved. Are you guys hearing me? Like when it comes to this conversation of defining love for yourself as an individual, if you are constantly in a position of going, serving others, doing for others, working for others, living for others, making future plans for others, and you don't ever take a moment to break and really just consider yourself, how is it that you can even be aware of what you may want or need in any given moment? And sometimes in not taking time for yourself, it can create resentment in your relationships where it's not even the fault of the people around you. And I started to notice this myself in my journey when I heard myself saying over and over again, as a mom of two, a wife, an entrepreneur, I need alone time. I just want to be by myself. I remember at one point in my journey, and this was during the pandemic, I kept saying things like, I just want to be in the middle of the woods and I want to be able to hear the birds. Like, I just want silence. And I would repeat this over and over. I heard myself saying it to my siblings. I heard myself saying it to Nick. I heard myself saying to everybody. And it dawned on me on that at that point that for almost 4 or 5 years of my motherhood journey, I hadn't had a day to myself. Not one full day of just silence to myself. As a full-time stay-at-home mom, a lot of my time was spent with my kids. Most of my day was spent with my kids. And when my kids had gone to sleep for the day, then I was spending time with my husband. But I very rarely had time for myself. And at that point, I realized I needed a me-cation. A me-cation, not a vacation, a me-cation. It was just a 3-day stay in a tiny house cabin down in Maryland, but it was such a relaxing time. What was really interesting was that while I thought I wanted to be by myself, what the Lord revealed to me in that time was that I actually didn't want to be by myself. While I was on that vacation, though I had all the time in the world, or at least 72 hours, to just be by myself and do exactly what I said I wanted, which was to be in the middle of the woods by myself and hearing the birds chirping. What I found I was drawn to was spending time with other people, meeting new people, engaging in meaningful conversations, all of which were things that were missing in my day-to-day life. I came back with a sense of self-awareness that I wouldn't have been able to gain otherwise. But the reason why I share this JOYrney story is because I think sometimes we can feel as parents, caregivers, entrepreneurs, people who serve other people, busy people that serve other people at that, it can be really easy to think that we don't deserve the break or that it's not helpful for us to take time for ourselves. When the truth of the matter is, if you don't take that time for yourself, you end up depleted. And it's also not to say that if you make time to prioritize self-care or just times of stillness and silence with yourself, that it isn't actually serving your relationships in a way that's impactful. Because it is. You actually need that time to better serve your community and your relationships. You get what I'm saying? I feel like I'm starting to talk around the point a little bit. So I'm going to read a piece of scripture that came up in my devotional time last week that really just kind of solidified the point for me. And it comes from Matthew 14. And it was right after Jesus had heard about his cousin, John the Baptist, being executed. And I mean, his cousin and him, they rolled tight. Okay. Like, John the Baptist was the one who was speaking about the one who was coming, the Messiah that was coming, the way, the truth, the life. The Messiah was his cousin, Jesus. And they were also born around the same time. So like, that was kind of his homie. And to hear that your cousin had been killed and in such a brutal way can take a toll on you. Just to set the tone for what we're about to read. Okay, Matthew 14, it says, when Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, this is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food. Jesus replied, they do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. We have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, they answered. Bring them here to me, he said, Jesus, that is. And he directed the people to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men. besides women and children. Immediately, this is now verse 22, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone. And the reason why I'm sharing it is because Jesus was a man who was on a mission. He was always clear on what his mission was, okay? He was the Messiah. He is the Messiah. He was put here to heal and save and be God on earth. Okay? He was very clear on what his mission was. But one thing I've come to appreciate in my spiritual growth and understanding of Christ was the fact that as much as he was clear on his mission to serve others, he was also very clear on his need to take time for himself to be in the presence of his Father. Like, Jesus spent a lot of time praying. Jesus spent a lot of time in isolation. Jesus spent a lot of time just meditating with the Lord and being one with the Lord's presence. And seeing Jesus exemplify the need to take time for himself. Because again, mind you, at the start of this, it says when Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. He was on his way to grieve in isolation the death of his cousin. Okay? He was on his way to be by himself. But when the crowds heard where he was going, they followed him. But rather than ignoring the crowds, he didn't ignore the crowds. He went and he served in his mission, but he also didn't neglect his need to be by himself. And as someone who cares a lot for others and cares a lot about their well-being, their joy, their lives, personally, professionally, all the things, this time around when I read that scripture, it really hit different because just because you're on a mission doesn't mean you don't take time for yourself. If Jesus did not take time to replenish his spirit, his mind, his energy, he would still be able to do the things. But I think it's very beautiful that he gives us an example of what it means to also give your time to relax and be refueled in spending time by yourself. Think about it. At one point when I was reading the story of the woman who touched the hem of Jesus's garment to be healed after 12 years of bleeding, it spoke about how when she touched his garment, he felt energy leave himself as she was being healed. And he stated it, "Who touched me?" His disciples said, "Jesus." Well, there are so many people here. Like, how do you know anybody touched you? It could have been anybody. A couple of years ago, as I read that, having a thought where it was like, dag, like just imagine walking places and having everyone like grabbing for your attention and your physical body so that they can be healed. If you are constantly giving your energy away, but never taking time to just rest and replenish your energy yourself, at some point, the well will run dry. And so I think it's just so beautiful that the Lord tells us that he not only tells us, but he shows us that we need to give ourselves the gift of time. Let me tell you, after I took that medication, I came back a happier mom. I came back a happier wife. I came back a more clear entrepreneur. And I also came back with an understanding of how important community was for me in my ability to love others and love them well. Because again, I thought I wanted to be by myself. And in some ways I was, where it gave me space to reflect. But I thought that it was so beautiful that what I really needed in that moment was time to rediscover myself. One thing that became very clear to me during that trip was the fact that I hadn't been giving myself time to do things that I used to love, space to do nothing, having conversations with strangers, which if you guys don't know, that's kind of how I started as an on-air host at one point in my career. I would talk to strangers on the street, giving myself time to people watch, giving myself time to just be outside and not constantly feeling like I have to be paying attention to all of the other things and people around me. And that's the gift of what that medication gave me. It really allowed me to get clear on one part of my love language that was missing, which was spending time with people, but in a way where I also get to spend time with myself, if that makes any sense. So yeah, give yourself the gift of time. And again, if you're not sure of how to start that process and what that even looks like, check out the last episode about managing your time, tasks, and to-dos with joy. But I feel like I said a lot more than I intended. So let's move on to number two. Number two, the second thing that you can do to start building self-love and confidence with joy is to clearly express your needs. Okay? Clearly express your needs. In this season, what is it that you really need and desire in order to feel loved, but more importantly, to be loved? Okay? How are you giving those things to yourself? And how are you expressing those things to others? It is really easy to say you don't have something when nobody can read your mind and they don't know that you even want it. Are you hearing me? Like, are y'all picking up what I'm putting down? Part of my journey that really helped me understand this was when I felt a lack of intimacy in my relationship. Okay. And the reason why wasn't because my husband wasn't loving, and it wasn't because he wasn't caring for me. The reason why I was feeling a lack of intimacy was because I didn't myself even know what form of intimacy I desired anymore. As I had transitioned into motherhood and marriage around the same time, there was a period where I kind of lost myself. I lost my identity. I lost an understanding of who I was, what I wanted, why I wanted the things that I wanted, because so much of my attention was invested in other people around me. So again, I found myself complaining a lot, like to myself, but also to my husband. And he was so patient and loving, and he would just listen to me. Even when he would do the things that I had requested, because I kept hearing myself repeating things or saying things, I could imagine that at one point it felt like nothing was good enough. I know personally, if somebody kept coming to me and complaining about things and saying they wanted this, and then I'm doing the things, but then they're complaining about other things, I would feel like, well, what do you really want? Like, and it seems like nothing that I do is good enough. And so I really started to think about this from his perspective. And I began to recognize, as I took moments of stillness and quiet for myself, it wasn't because of his actions that I was actually complaining, but it was because I didn't know myself anymore to clearly understand what it is that I liked, what I wanted, what I didn't like, or what I even needed in any given moment. Because again, I wasn't taking time to evaluate those things for myself. At that period of time, I recognized that I needed to rediscover what it meant for me to be intimate with myself. I began to hold myself with more care and kindness and respect and gentleness. And it even started to bleed into things like my style. Because once I started to experience that shift and that change, I began to recognize other ways that I had been neglecting myself. One of them being in how I dressed. As a new mom, I thought in my mind that the expectation was, you're going to be in the house, you're going to be caring for these kids, you're not really going anywhere, so you don't really need to get dressed up. You know, I think there's this common joke about new motherhood where you're so busy that you barely have time to shower, you barely have time to do your hair, you're living in sweatpants and ripped up t-shirts and things like that. And for a good 2 years of my motherhood journey, I bought into that idea of motherhood. But at the point where I began to rediscover intimacy with myself, I began to choose differently. And what I recognized was that I had stopped caring for myself as a woman, right? Which is crazy because you think as a wife and a mother, you know you're a woman, but I had stopped seeing myself as a woman. And what was missing in terms of intimacy in my relationship was that I wanted to be revered and loved as a woman, right, by my husband, but I myself was not celebrating my womanhood. I was treating it more like a job than like a gift or something to be revered. Does that make sense? So at that point, I decided to tap into my feminine energy a little bit more. I was really into the idea of my soft girl era before it became a viral sensation. I started working out again. I started drinking more water. I started eating better. I started caring more about my appearance, both at home and outside of the home. So, yes, like I started to revamp my wardrobe because at that point I hadn't realized how many of my clothes I'd had since like high school. And I'm talking about even my underwear, okay? Like I was revamping everything. Tossing out underwear, I started purchasing lingerie. I got a lingerie subscription. I was throwing out my old PJs because even though I'm at home, that doesn't mean that I can't look and feel good. I started buying silk pajamas and I even started going on solo dates because I was expressing what I needed. And what I needed was that alone time, but I also needed to feel like I was loving myself in order to express what that love could look like to my partner. I say all this to say that it really started with me first feeding my spirit by speaking loving words over myself and acknowledging, and this is the kicker, okay, because I think this is where a lot of us get it messed up. I needed to acknowledge that I was worthy and deserving of being cared for as I was caring for others, okay? Because while I was expecting others to recognize how I needed to be cared for, especially in my marriage, right? I need you to care for me. I need you to love me. I want you to dote on me. All of those things. I couldn't expect other people to do it for me if I couldn't do it for myself. And in my moments of weakness where I wasn't even sure of where to start, reading scripture really helped me understand what I could begin to claim over my life and recognizing that if nobody loves me, at least the Lord loves me. Like, if nobody likes me, at least God likes me, you know? And if He likes me, then that gives me access to liking myself. And I had to rediscover the reasons why I liked myself. And I know that that's probably something not many people would know or say or think out loud, but at one point I didn't. And I remember thinking about my relationship, and it's like, well, I would question, well, does my husband love me? Does he like me? And again, he was showing me that he liked me and loved me, right? Through his actions. But it was very hard for me to receive it and really accept it because I myself did not like myself. I had fallen so far from who I was at my core and knowing who I was that it was very hard for me to accept myself in that season. This is really part of what inspired the JOYrney process and my framework for the work that I do as a joy strategist. I needed to rediscover myself, right? I needed to journey to joy. And this process allowed me to recognize the ways that I wanted to be loved and to love myself again so that I could then also receive the love that was always and had always been given to me. And in the moments when I didn't see it, in the moments where I didn't feel it, I would sing it. And that's why praise and worship is such a powerful thing. But in the moments when I was weakest in my spirits, I would pray for the right words to be able to articulate what was needed or wanted. There are a couple of joy gems from scripture that talk about the importance of words. And if you follow me online or if you've been listening to this podcast, you know I talk about the power of words all the time because your words inspire your thoughts. Your thoughts are ultimately what inspire your actions, and it's your actions that create your lifestyle. So you really have to be mindful with your words. I want to share a couple of joy gems from scripture to just illuminate this point. The first being from Colossians 4:6, and it says, "Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person." So basically, take your time when you're speaking to people, okay? Be nice about it. And if you're going to be nice about it with other people, you definitely need to be nice about it with yourself. Be mindful of how you speak to yourself. Some others come from Proverbs chapter 15, verse 4, and it says, "A gentle tongue is a tree of life, but perverseness in it breaks the spirit." So true, man. Harsh words can just break the spirit. And lastly, Proverbs 16, verse 24. "Gracious words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and health to the body." So, my friends, my point is this: be kind to yourself. This can help build intimacy in how you love yourself so that you can then love others. You feel me? But you can't begin to get clear on what that even looks like if you don't even do part one, step one, which is to give yourself the gift of time. All right, but I'm not going to harp on that because we already talked about it. So let's move on to point 3. We're at the halfway point. Okay, point 3 is a short one, but it's a juicy one, and one that is often left out of our self-love and confidence equation. Point 3 is this, okay? You ready? Listen to your words and feelings, but don't give in to them. I'm going to say that one more time. Listen to your words and your feelings, but don't give in to them. All right. You need to take time to hear what your words are saying. But beyond that, you need to take time to dig deeper to understand and fully assess what the words you're saying and you hear yourself repeating are revealing. Because a lot of times we talk about feelings, right? Feelings matter. They absolutely matter. Okay. Your feelings are important. But let me tell you what your feelings are not. Your feelings are not always the truth. We can have a lot of feelings about things, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the things that we feel are the absolute truth. We're emotional beings. A lot of our decisions are dictated by our emotions. And our feelings are important because God Himself gave them to us. God made us emotional beings. God gave us feelings. God Himself is someone who has feelings and emotions. Like if you read scripture, it talks about how he is a jealous God. He would be angry with the Israelites when they wouldn't trust Him. He would be hurt when they would serve or worship other idols. Like God Himself has feelings, but beyond giving into our feelings and using them to influence our reactions, what we really need to do is understand what our feelings are trying to tell us about the situations and circumstances that we are in. Because with that information, we can then begin to make changes that help us assess our feelings so that we can bring them back to joy. Because joy is like the pinnacle of all the feelings. When you think about it, when it comes to our lives, our careers, our relationships, the things that we are constantly striving for, most of the time, the things that we're actually trying to achieve are to bring us peace or joy. Like thinking that you need to make a certain amount of money is so that you can have financial freedom, right? Which ultimately brings you back to what? Peace. Thinking that you need to have all the free time in the world so that you can then stop worrying about having to work a 9 to 5 so that you can then just live creatively, bounce around the world, travel, and not have to worry about anything. Is because you want to more than likely do what? Have more joy in your life. You want to be more creative. You want to feel inspired. All of those things come back to peace and joy. And so it's really important that we recognize our feelings, because when we begin to see where our feelings are on the feeling spectrum, then we can begin to work our way back up to joy, which is ultimately where we want to be. Because when we're in our joy flow, that's often where we also find peace and where we're able to live in our purpose and all of those other good things, which is the reason why I always harp on joy and purpose. But the real question in all of this is, how can you begin to listen to your feelings but not give in to them? And there's a joy gem for that, okay? And it comes from Proverbs 15:28. And it says, the heart of the godly thinks carefully before speaking, okay? The heart of the godly thinks carefully before speaking. Because again, your words influence your thoughts and your thoughts influence your actions. And if your feelings are influencing the words that you speak to be negative, to be self-deprecating, to be hurtful or insult, like whatever the thing is towards yourself, is really hard to then get yourself back to that place of peace and joy. And the part of my journey story that inspired this conversation came from, like I shared with you all earlier, feeling like my husband, Nick, wasn't telling me that he loved me enough. Okay. Like not hearing him say the words, I love you enough. Though he tells me he loves me. And again, more importantly, he shows me all the time through his stability, through his presence, through his attention, through his kindness, through his care. He shows me all the time that he loves me. But because I wasn't hearing those words, I had the feeling that I wasn't loved, which again, not true. The feeling lied to me. But the truth is, in that season, I really didn't like myself. I didn't really love myself because I felt like I was a shell of who I was pre-motherhood. I didn't feel creative. I didn't feel cute. I definitely didn't feel confident in my body, in my mind, in my words, in my spirit. I lacked confidence. I didn't feel spontaneous or fun, which was something that I always prided myself on. And it was kind of a core piece of my identity that I hadn't really recognized prior to motherhood. I felt like I served no value outside of being a mother and a wife. I felt like I served no value outside of caring for my child all day. And I didn't feel like anything that I did was appreciated. Again, in all of these things, I felt. But this was the story that I was telling myself based on my feelings, when again, none of it was true. Those feelings kept me in a very dark place until I countered it with truth. But the only way I was able to come to that truth was by fact checking, verifying, and having some really intimate and honest conversation. So that meant that I had to stop avoiding uncomfortable conversations, okay? Because that's a thing. I wanted to feel and be transformed. But everything that I was basing my feelings on in that moment were not based on truth. And the only way to get to the truth was to actually discover what the truth was. And the feelings that I had around my relationship, the feelings that I had around my role as a mother had been based on internal dialogue. So there was a period where I sat down and I had conversations with my husband and I asked him how he actually felt about things. Rather than feeling like he didn't love me, it's like, well, do you love me? Like, rather than feeling like I serve no value outside of caring for my child, we had a conversation around what it looked like to feel and be valued. It took me fact checking my feelings. And the greatest and clearest way, the easiest way to do this, y'all, the easiest way to do this is to simply ask questions. Ask questions so you can have real answers, like real tangible evidence, real data that then gives you insight to what's true, right? Versus the feelings and the stories you may be feeding yourself. Where may you actually be rejecting acts of support and love? Because again, I felt like my husband didn't love me based on the fact that I just wasn't hearing the words. But everything that he was doing, all of the support that he would give me, the questions that he would ask me about my business that I was building at the time, the money he would give me to do things with my business, all of those things pointed towards the fact that he not only loved me, but he supported me and that he cared for me. But because I simply wasn't hearing the words, the story I was telling myself was that he doesn't love me the same way or he doesn't love me as much, which absolutely wasn't true. So how may you be getting in your own way, and where may you be rejecting acts of love and support that are currently flowing your way? And then the last thing I want you to ask yourself is, are your words, feelings, thoughts, and actions actively building up your relationships with yourself and others as you carry out your personal mission? But in order to do this, you also have to know what your mission is. Do you know what your mission is? That comes back to purpose. And that also comes back to the things that bring you joy. So use the feelings for information, but don't give in to them, okay? Don't succumb to them and the stories that they create. And I want to keep going. That's point 3. I feel like I've been talking so much. We have 2 more points, y'all, and I want to dive into them right now, but it's time for me to go pick up my kids from school. So if you're watching on YouTube, don't mind. When we come back, it's going to look a little different, but we got 2 more points to go. Hang in there with me, okay? For almost a decade, I'd been looking for the perfect planner system. But every time I thought I found a planner that met my time management needs, there always seemed to be something missing. Most of the planners that I would use failed to meet all of my needs and considerations as an entrepreneurial mom. And when I wasn't able to hit every single task that I set out to do for the day, it often left me feeling like I was failing to meet my own expectations. Okay, cue the disappointment, the guilt, and all the other things that we try to avoid when we're productive overachievers. Can you relate to this at all? I'm sure you can. Right? And it's for this very reason that I decided to create my own planner called the JOYrney Daily Planner, which prioritized my mental health and well-being first in order to influence and inspire more productivity and fulfillment in my life, career, and relationships. I want to let you guys know that the JOYrney Daily Planner is in the world. This planner system was created with busy women, busy parents, busy caregivers, busy entrepreneurs in mind to provide clarity in what you do. But more importantly, it was created with the intention of highlighting why you do the things that you do and making sure that you're aligned with your purpose with every single decision, action, and task that you decide to take on. So this way you can feel that your time is being well spent. This planner system was also created to prioritize your well-being because it doesn't matter how much money you're making in the world if your mind, your body, your spirit, and your social life is in shambles. One of the other main goals of this planner, and something that sets it aside from all of the other planners on the market, is that it was created to reduce overwhelm. Overall, the main point of this planner is to make sure that you are including fun in your quest for productivity. Because as I always say in the Journey to Purpose, joy is our job. And the moment we're able to get clear on what brings us joy and we're able to understand how that joy is connected to our purpose, then we're able to selfishly live in our joy and in service to others, but not from a space of obligation and overwhelm, but one where we're really committed to living out that joy on a daily basis in service to others. I feel like I just said a lot. And I feel like I repeated a lot, but that's because that's what it is. So with all that being said, if you are interested in getting a JOYrney Daily Planner for yourself, make sure you head on over to ericalasan.com and purchase your JOYrney Daily Planner today. Okay. And remember, we're on the journey together, one feel-good thing at a time. 7 hours later. We're back. The kids are sleeping. The hubby is doing his thing. So where were we? Oh yeah, step 4. Now, we've arrived at step 4. You're probably at this point wondering, how can I avoid giving into my feelings, right? Making note of what they are, but not giving into them. I say you should start playing dirty, my friend. And when I say that, I mean, technically we're not playing dirty because, we are children of light. And children of the Most High. So we don't get dirty, okay? We like to stay clean, cleansed, and sanctified. But really, what I mean by start playing dirty is stop playing by the world's standards, okay? And start tapping into your spiritual gifts, your spiritual powers, and a heavenly perspective. And start bringing all things captive, okay? All the things captive to Christ. And as you begin to do this, you may note that this action of bringing all things captive to Christ requires a bit of a love transfer. And this, my friends, is when it's exceptionally helpful to have wise counsel, community, and a solid vibe tribe in the mix. Sometimes you have to recognize that you cannot do things on your own. Sometimes when it comes to building self-love and when it comes to creating self-confidence, it requires you getting or gaining or starting that process with the love or the confidence of someone else in you. Someone believing in you, someone transferring their belief onto you. Here's the kicker though. When someone says something about you, when someone begins to share that love with you, when someone begins to express their confidence in you, you have to begin to take them at their word. Obviously, they're seeing something that you're not seeing in the moment, but it doesn't make what they're seeing any less true. Even though you may not feel it, claim it as yours. So I'm going to share the JOYrney story from my life that inspired this thought of needing a love transfer and playing dirty by the world's standards and really starting to tap into the spiritual. After reading the 5 love languages, I became aware of the fact that physical touch was my primary love language, as I shared with you guys earlier. I've always been one to express physical love in hugs. Again, I'm a hugger, but I hadn't realized just how important it was for me to receive or be physically held or touched or whatever the case is in order to feel love. At the point at which I became aware of this, I began to request that love and that love transfer more often. I began to request more hugs from my husband. I began to receive the hugs from my kids, though, I mean, they gave them to me all the time. Now it became a matter of me actually asking them, hey, come give me a hug. And as I was in this journey of building self-confidence again, in the moments where I felt weakest or where I felt I was at my worst or at my lowest, that simple act of receiving a love transfer really helped me put things into perspective so that I could then access the words that I needed to speak life into myself and my situation or my circumstance and really begin that process, almost like a jump start, if you will, a jump start towards the self-love journey that I was on. There was a joy gem that I read from 2 Corinthians 10. And it says, by the humility and gentleness of Christ, I appeal to you, I, Paul, who am timid when face to face with you, but bold toward you when you are away. I beg you that when I come, I may not have to be as bold as I expect to be towards some people who think that we live by the standards of this world. Okay. Paul was like, I'm not playing with y'all. We're not even on the same level. For though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And we take captive every thought. Like, that's kind of heavy, right? What Paul is essentially saying here is we have the power, right? We're not fighting. We aren't fighting on the same plane with you guys. We're not putting up hands. We're not throwing bows. We're not going back and forth with you. Every single thing that you could do to potentially attack us in every way that you could conceive to attack us, we bring captive to Christ in our thoughts, in our actions, in the words we say, and how we even begin to fight and wage war on these things. Continuing on with verse 8. So even if I boast somewhat freely about the authority the Lord gives us for building you up rather than tearing you down, I will not be ashamed of it. I do not want to seem to be trying to frighten you with my letters. For some say his letters are weighty and forceful, but in person he is unimpressive and his speaking amounts to nothing. Verse 12. We do not dare to classify or compare ourselves with some who commend themselves. When they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves, they are not wise. We, however, will not boast beyond proper limits, but will confine our boasting to the sphere of service God himself has assigned to us. But, he says in verse 17, let the one who boasts boast in the Lord. For it is not the one who commends himself who is approved, but the one who the Lord commends. Are y'all hearing that? That was bars on bars. Basically, Paul was telling us that we don't have to fight by the world's standards. Like, as children of the Most High, as children of God, as believers, we are able to fight from a perspective that is above the playing field. Okay, we're able to fight from a spiritual perspective. And if you really think about it, it's not fighting fair, because we're not fighting just with weapons in our hands or in our flesh. We're able to fight with the army of God at our side. We're able to fight using our words, but recognizing that our words carry weight and power that then extends to the heavenly realm. And we have access to God's ear himself because we have Christ interceding on our behalf. So, I mean, technically, it's really not playing fair. It's kind of playing dirty, but we like it that way because it takes all of our weaknesses and it turns them into strengths, and recognizing that we don't have to fight the battles and we definitely don't have to fight them on our own. With this, it's really beautiful to recognize that self-love can be supported by others around you. Self-confidence can be built in community. And as you begin to find your vibe tribe, as you begin to find wise counsel, as you begin to cultivate community, you're then able to recognize how all of those things can benefit not only your personal life, your professional life, your spiritual life, and everything in between. So if you need to tap into a love transfer to begin this process of building self-love and building self-confidence, do it. We've reached number 5. The fifth and final piece of this building self-love and confidence conversation is this. It's very simple. Lead by example. Okay. Love others the way that you would want to be loved. But more importantly, okay, this is where we sometimes miss it. Love yourself as you want others to love you. You can't begin to teach people how you want to be loved if you yourself aren't loving yourself in that same manner. Don't expect people to respect your love language or your boundaries, okay? If you don't do it for yourself. The best way to teach others isn't through your words, right? It's not a matter of do as I say, not as I do. No, you want people to do as you do so that they can also do as you say. And with this, there also comes an opportunity for you to begin to better understand the love language of others around you. And as you begin to do this, you can then understand how to best serve them. Because again, you may express love in a certain type of way, but if it's not received or felt by them, then it doesn't quite land the same way. But as you begin to have conversations and show up for yourself, and as they begin to experience you showing up in a different way, loving yourself, being kind to yourself, being mindful of the words that you speak to yourself, and ultimately how you speak to others, they'll want a little bit of that magic and that joy for themselves too. And that is when you, my friend, get to have a conversation around what love means for them, what it means for them to be loved, feel loved, and how you as a good friend, partner, sister, cousin, family member, whatever the case is, how you can begin to sprinkle that love and affection on them. And that is how you foster amazing and thriving relationships. I came to this understanding through my own self-love journey. After becoming a mom, after spending 16 months of playing the good mom, good wife role, where I was at a point where I was so burnt out that I just didn't feel like doing anything. I got to a point where I was like, you know what? I can't focus on anybody else. I don't feel like I want to focus on anyone else. I really just need to focus on myself. And initially that felt very selfish. And the conversation around it, as I began to express and articulate my need for quiet time, quality time with myself, my need to be away from my family. As I had these conversations with Nick, my husband, I began to feel that he would take it as me being selfish. And I started to feel really bad when I was in a really good place in my journey. And I felt all of the things that I wanted to feel, like creative. I started feeling cute again. I started feeling confidence in the way I would speak to people and the projects that I was working on. I also started to experience more success and joy in my business that I was building. I realized that at that point, I could then hold space to listen and really be engaged in hearing about what the needs and wants were of my husband at that time. And not to say that I had thrown them to the wayside completely, that's not the case. But what I realized was that I became a lot more receptive to the things that were being shared with me or conversations that we were having. I was a lot more engaged because I didn't feel like I was at my max. I didn't feel super burnt out anymore. I actually had space in my reservoir or my cup to receive and participate in the conversations. And it wasn't a matter of feeling like the Charlie Brown voice was going on in the back of my head where it was like, won't, 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 won't. You guys know that feeling? As always, I have a joy gem from scripture to help illustrate this point. And it's Jesus. Jesus himself, the big G, the big J dog. And it's a scripture from Matthew 13. If you're someone who studies the Bible, you probably know where I'm going to go with this. But it is the story of Jesus washing his disciples' feet. Matthew 13:13. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were here in the world, he loved them to the end. Them's his peeps. His vibe tribe, if you will, his disciples, the 12. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Because if you don't know, it was one of his own people that turned him over, okay? Judas. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Jesus answered, "Those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you." I'm sure at this point, Jesus was giving the side eye to you know who, okay? Because he knew exactly who was going to betray him. But I digress. Continuing with verse 11. For he knew who was going to betray him. And that was why he said, not everyone was clean. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. "Do you understand what I have done for you?" he asked them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly, I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them." Basically, Jesus led by example because, as he stated, yes, I'm the teacher. Yes, I am Lord. Yes, I am the King of Kings. Yes, I am the Messiah, the one that you have all been talking about. And prophets have prophesied for generations. I am all of those things. But even I live to serve others. He wanted them to understand that their role, even though they were kind of in this special position of being his star students, and the ones to really bring this message of love and the gospel and the good news to everyone else. They were in that position, but their job was really to be able to serve others with love. But in order to do this, you have to be able to learn, understand, and serve the love languages of others. But you can't do that if you can't even do it for yourself, okay? The main point is lead by example. So as you begin to do the things you say that you want to do, in order to grow self-love and confidence with yourself, it teaches other people what is required to love you and how to love you. That's the last and final piece. So let's bring it all together, okay? Let's tie this up with a really pretty bow and summarize these 5 steps for building self-love and confidence with joy. You guys ready? Number 1, Give yourself the gift of time because, as I stated, we all need time for self. Okay. Self-love, self-care, self-reflection, all the things. You need time for yourself. And again, if you're not sure of where to start that process of how to curate that time for yourself, check out the last podcast episode. Number 2, clearly express your needs and how you want to be loved. In this season, what is it that you really need in order to feel and be loved? Number 3, listen to your words and feelings, but again, don't give in to them, okay? Number 4, start playing dirty, okay? This is probably one of the only times I'll tell you to play dirty. Stop playing by the world's standards, okay? Tap into a love transfer by partnering up with the Holy Spirit and bringing all thoughts, all things, all positions, all everything, bringing all the things captive to Christ. Number 5, the fifth and final thing, lead by example. Don't expect people to respect or acknowledge your love language or your boundaries if you don't respect them yourselves. Remember, the best way to teach others isn't just by what you say, but more importantly, by what you do. Okay. As always, I really want to wrap this up with helping you understand what this entire conversation around building self-love and confidence means for you. I have said this, I will continue to say this, and I will probably sound like I'm beating a dead horse with saying this, but your words matter. Your words matter so much. They are so important. God's words laid the foundation for the earth and everything in it. But guess what? He has given us that same ability, power, and authority to use words to manifest and create lives that we love. Like literally, your words are seeds, okay? You can plant them and build a life where you thrive and you grow, or you can plant words that literally cause your life to be filled with grief and misery. So be mindful of how you speak to yourself when it comes to this process of learning how to love yourself. But what I've also hope you've gained from this episode is an understanding that confidence, much like love, can be built through your words. And it also requires time and practice, okay? Building confidence only comes with repetition and practice. These are skills that you can develop over time. Confidence really starts with you recognizing the power of your own voice, your thoughts, and the ability to manifest things that you want, desire, need, everything through faith. You have the power yourself to sow seeds of love into your life and speak words of life over yourself. You have that power. If no one else is going to do it, you can do it for yourself. And if you're not able to find those words for yourself because you're in a really dark place or you're in a place where you can't see your way to the light, guess what? There's an entire book of love notes, promises, and prayers that are just waiting for you to claim in the Bible. If you're short on words and thoughts and you're not sure of where to get started or how you can begin to even find positive words, start with the Bible. The book of Psalms and Proverbs are really great places to get started in terms of just finding like all the feelings, right? Any feeling that you can probably consider or think about has been expressed in the book of Psalms. As always, I have the Joy Gem of the week. And today's Joy Gem comes from Proverbs 18, verses 20 to 21. And it says, "From the fruit of their mouth, a person's stomach is filled. With the harvest of their lips, they are satisfied. The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit." I don't know. I feel like this is almost a mic drop moment. If there's any, if there's any way to summarize this entire podcast episode, is this: the tongue, your words, has the power of life and death. Simmer on it a little bit and recognize that you have the power to wield that tool in a way that can literally build you up or break you down, create or destroy. It's your choice. With all that being said, and trust, a lot has been said today. What is one word that you are choosing to focus on in this week and beyond as you journey towards building self-love and confidence? I'll go first. In this season, I think my word is patience. Yeah, I like that. That's the word I'm speaking over my life and my situation right now. patience. With that, guys, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode and it blesses your journey for the week. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel or the podcast, wherever you happen to be listening to it. You know, we're always trying to grow our vibe tribe. If you know of anyone that could benefit from this conversation around building self, love, and confidence, please, please, please share the podcast with them and the video link over on YouTube. And if you want to take this relationship to the next level, we can do that, okay? You can subscribe to my newsletter called JOYrney Mail, and I'll send you some love notes and some positive words directly to your inbox every other week. The link to subscribe to the newsletter can be found in the show notes, or if you're watching on YouTube, it can be found in the description box. I look forward to diving into another faith-fueled, purpose-propelled chat in the next couple of weeks. Trust me, you do not want to miss this one. We're going to have a special guest, hopefully, fingers crossed, joining us for that episode. Okay, I'm going to ruin the surprise. I'm going to tell you right now. It's the hubby, my husband, Nick. He very rarely ever gets on camera with me and does videos with me. But every once in a while, I would say probably like every 7 or 8 years, he does me the honor of participating in some of my content with me. So hopefully we can get him on the podcast for a guest episode. And we're going to be talking about the rules of engagement. If you were looking for a conversation around love and marriage and how you can engage both things with more joy and purpose involved in the mix, make sure you don't miss it. Be there, here, or be square. Remember, we're on the journey together, one feel-good thing at a time. Bye, guys. Have a great week.